Hello! So you've been playing Mass Effect for so long that you couldn't picture yourself dedicating your time and attention to Anthem? I have. You like BioWare, you've been playing their oldies, and now you're somewhat skeptical about Anthem? I am too. EA, you know?
I sense a disturbance in the force.
In this video, I simply wanted to present Anthem, how it compares to and contrasts with the multiplayer components of BioWare's last two Mass Effect games. These are just things, FYI, for players wanting another perspective than that of the big media. Things that only dedicated players know. I have thousands of hours on each of the two Mass Effect games I will focus on, and I will use that to discuss the following points in Anthem: controls, basic gameplay, advanced game mechanics, including builds, combos, enemy encounters. Let's do it. Shepard felt somewhat difficult to control back in the day, huh? It is clear for many of us that if Mass Effect 2 probably had the best story, Mass Effect 3 had the best controls. Shepard was now able to dodge, and running was entirely reworked. He or she now had infinite stamina. The truth of the matter we all know is that in the 2 years between Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, controls were polished in preparation for the multiplayer. The playable characters had to be easy to move around the map, including those fat Asturians, and characters like this were what made adrenaline modules worth it. Playable characters had to be able to rapidly take cover and get out of it. As a result, controls in Mass Effect 3 were much more fluid than in the two previous titles, but the story was sick. Andromeda took the same direction and continued even further. Controls were polished, and this was even the only thing that all the naysayers embraced when the game came out 2 years ago. It was way more fluid than Mass Effect 3. The problem with Mass Effect 3 had been that running, hardcover, dodging, action, and mantling all were the same key. Andromeda fixed that by introducing separate keys for all of these, and simultaneously implemented jumping in the controls, but I will get back to this when I discuss map verticality. Conversely, Andromeda fixed a few things Mass Effect 3 had, like reload cancelling, the ability to cancel the animation of your character and consequently shoot with strong weapons more rapidly, and it simplified cover and made it automatic. Hard cover was now barely distinguishable from soft cover, and did the same thing with melee, a change that many Krogan enthusiasts did not condone. In terms of controls, then, Anthem did not change much vis-à-vis Andromeda. Like the latest introduced the jetpack, stationary flight, and the air melee strike for all the playable characters, no exception. Anthem gave all the javelins the ability to fly, swim, and introduced an ultimate power similar to some Final Fantasy games. Otherwise, controls are pretty much the same. Pretty much. Infinite stamina was removed for all the javelins. Now it's more like you boost your javelin in a sprint fashion, but only for a limited but improvable amount of time, depending on your build. Another thing that changed is the ability to dodge, which the Colossus does not have. It will instead wield a shield, aesthetically akin to the Paladins in Mass Effect 3, but very different in purpose. The dodge for the Storm, in comparison, will bring you memories of the N7 Fury, N7 Slayer, or the Asari Duelist and the Human Guardian. The concept for Mass Effect 3 was clear. Players had to work as a team to survive through more and more dangerous waves, 11 in total. The best illustration of cooperation first resided in the objectives on waves 3, 6, and 10, but it was also present in different basic aspects of the game: revives, combos, strategy, etc. The idea hasn't changed at all in Anthem, and whereas Andromeda did little to emphasize cooperation more than Mass Effect 3, except by augmenting the number of enemies by 1/2 and making Platinum games impossible to solo most of the time, Anthem breaks new ground. For example, you are now unable to revive on your own. Your javelin may not be repaired without another squad mate. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean Anthem does not offer any possibilities for solos, but it is now more limited. Gameplay can basically be broken down into 3 categories: action, RPG, exploration. Each appears more or less conspicuously in the missions, strongholds, and free play featured in Anthem. Based on the feedback they had from Mass Effect 3, BioWare designed Mass Effect Andromeda as an improved, more dynamic version of Mass Effect 3 multiplayer. Same studio, same people, don't forget that. The guys know that people wanted Mass Effect multiplayer to be all about exploration, and this is what they tried to do in Andromeda with the Remnant Dungeons, a special and ephemeral map in which a squad of 4 players move from one area to the next, each having a specific objective at some point. Well, strongholds and missions in Anthem are just like Remnant's dungeons, made a lot bigger. The strongholds can have at least 3 areas and missions at least 3 stages. The only difference being you need to go back to 4 tasks between each big stage of a mission, whereas strongholds feature successive areas in a row. Another difference is that unlike missions that you can play solo, the game will not allow you to play private on strongholds or on free play. Free play means you roam around the world and random objectives may appear, like fates in Final Fantasy XIV or not. It's basically what BioWare had tried to implement in Andromeda, as certain missions would only activate if you explored the open world. As you know, this dates back to 2007. What kind of objectives, you will ask? Well, again, it resembles Andromeda more than it does Final Fantasy. Fortunately, it's like destroy a certain number of objects like scorpion nests or enemy stuff, or objectives like what Mass Effect multiplayer enthusiasts came to nickname Pizza. If there is no objective, it will be more like random encounters, and these are roughly similar to the wave system in the 2 Mass Effect games, as you stick to one area/arena and kill waves of enemies getting stronger and stronger. In any case, for missions, free play, and strongholds alike, you will be rewarded with loots that appear as crystals and whose color will determine the rarity. When you kill strong enemies, armored targets, including turrets or boss enemies with shields, when you complete an objective in the form of a treasure box, or at the end of a game after the mission successful screen. On the field, everyone has the same number of crystals with the same rarity, but because looting is based on your level, the content differs for every player, as each build is likely to be very unique. Looting is indeed key to building your character, as loots contain weapons, gear for your systems, powers for your profile, and components. Understand equipment. The only thing you need to craft, unlike Mass Effect multiplayer, are the consumables, but at least they still exist, and so does the equipment, though it has been reworked a little, as you may carry many components to boost your stats. Ammo types, however, that made Mass Effect games so funny seem to have been removed from Anthem, meaning you rely even more on your gear. Yeah. Well, shit. Andromeda broke with the traditional 3 powers, 1 at a time system introduced in Mass Effect 2 and went back to Mass Effect 1, as you could now use all your powers in a row if you wanted to. Anthem keeps that and makes an even older dream come true, as it injects a new variable that previously did not exist, except in Andromeda's campaign, and that is the ability to choose your powers. Well, you may still choose 3, but unlike Andromeda, they are limited by categories or families of gear. So one Javelin may have more than a dozen different builds, but the possibilities are now as limitless as in its predecessor. Yes, it's true, BioWare games have progressively lost the diversity of characters that made them so great to play. This was seen in Andromeda, and this is even more prominent in Anthem. The combo system, whose origin dates back to Mass Effect 2, has again returned, except it is not as polished as it was in Andromeda, where it was made obvious that they were at the center of the game mechanics, especially in the multiplayer. In Anthem, I found it more cryptic, not as obvious, a bit like Mass Effect 3 where you had to experiment a little. Combos in Anthem are not as systematic as in Andromeda, where any detonator could be used regardless of the element used to prime a target. Again, that is another throwback at Mass Effect 3. The novelty in Anthem is the aura combos. Have a look at my early Interceptor build. If Andromeda polished the combo system, Anthem refined it, and it sure looks promising, but I will make another video about it. What about encounters? An old staple in Mass Effect 1 was the wave system. It was already present in some missions after certain objectives, and it was even more prominent in the Pinnacle Station DLC. Mass Effect 2 did not really change the deal. It just added more action to make them look less game-like or arcade-like. It wasn't therefore surprising that Mass Effect 3 multiplayer should first experiment with the wave system too. Each wave had a budget, except objective waves, certain enemies would not respawn, and it made a difference to know that. In Andromeda, as the formula worked, the number of waves was reduced to 7, but the budget was made bigger, so that the waves became considerably longer, but the logic was the same. Enemies become tougher as waves progress. Andromeda also introduced elite and boss enemies, conspicuously absent from Mass Effect 3, except perhaps for the collectors with possession, and they were added later. In Anthem, waves are less conspicuous. You basically move from one area, complete a specific objective, genocide an alien population, kill all the baddies in the name of democracy, go to the next area, rinse and repeat. Objectives are often broken down in 2 or 3 stages which sort of delineate and frame the waves in Anthem. For example, if in Area 2 you must recover 12 objects or echoes, there's a cap at the 8th. And you know that because there's basically a break in enemy spawns and the last 4 objects are made inaccessible. Then the 4 last objects are made available and enemy spawns become more aggressive, and depending on the difficulty, that's when you see legendary enemies popping out. Enemies won't be kited away from the objectives as easily as in Mass Effect 3. Another novelty is that the enemy spawns in the Scar faction have specific locations which are made visible on the map in the form of red portals. Similarly, Scorpions have eggs. Outlaws and Dominion forces, on the other hand, have more erratic spawns and overall more variations in enemy types. Now let's conclude with a few words on map verticality. The emphasis on verticality is just an extension of what we had in Mass Effect 3 with London and Condor, even more in Andromeda with most of the maps, notably Nimbus. Some areas are narrow and have multiple linear paths offering different routes to complete the objectives, while others will be completely open and circular, emphasizing at least 3 levels of verticality, sometimes 4 for turrets, and 1 stronghold. One mission can have both these area types. Free play is more localized, the Mass Effect 1 way. The behavior of enemies has not changed much since kiting you, forcing you out of cover. It has just been improved. enemies are still right-handed, and getting near them will trigger a melee animation that may cancel their shooting animation. And they're really fun to play against. They will remind you of certain encounters you had in Mass Effect 3, as well as in Mass Effect Andromeda. Anthem offers potential for soloing like its predecessors, but it is tougher in the sense that if you die, you will start from scratch in the same area as where you were killed. Objectives don't have a time limit, but enemy spawns were designed so as to make it urging you. Enemies with health only die very quickly, but like Andromeda, there are more enemies on the field than there ever were in Mass Effect 3, though there seems to still be a cap on certain enemy types. And depending on the game you're playing, free play with world events or contextual MMO-like tasks, strongholds with big arenas and long objectives, or multiple stage missions, waves will have different compositions, plus enemy factions now have extras to help them out. Scar strongholds will be covered with mines. Scorpions have eggs. Outlaws have turrets, etc. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it. I will make more about different aspects of the game and how it may be related to Mass Effect games. I don't think I will be letting Mass Effect games down as of now. Thank you for watching this video again. Don't forget to leave an impression. You can like or dislike this video as you want. That's the same thing for YouTube, and that will help me out. Also, you can leave a comment if you want. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Exalt out. Bye.